Roopesh Nair from Microsoft talks about the release capabilities in Azure Pipelines on today's Azure DevOps Podcast.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the Azure DevOps Podcast. As always, go online to www.azuredevops.show to see show notes and other episodes. And there's some really good back episodes, including episode 1 with Buck Hodges. And we're in all the podcast directories. But if you use a directory or location where we are not, let me know and we'll fix it. So today we're visiting with Roopesh Nair. Roopesh is a principal program manager at Microsoft. He's got over 20 years of experience in custom software, but at Microsoft, he works on the release capabilities in Azure Pipelines, and he's passionate about DevOps and likes working with customers. You can find him on Twitter at ROOPesh, P-E-S-H. Roopesh, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm good. I really appreciate you being with me. It's going to be an exciting show. We have a lot to talk about. And you've been in this industry for a long time and seen lots of changes. What is your personal journey been like, and how did you find yourself at Microsoft and in this role?
Thank you. I started in Microsoft about 6 years ago. Prior to that, I was a developer for a decade and a half, mostly working on Java and LAMP stack. I worked with Oracle for about 7 years, and before joining Microsoft, I was working from a company that was expanding its business into software. So pretty much software startup. And we had embraced OSS to the hilt. And when I was offered at Microsoft, I wasn't really sure if it was the right role for me or the job for me. I've always looked at Microsoft from outside, but then the team was Visual Studio Online, and it was about developer tools, and coming from development background. It was fairly straightforward decision, and I also switched into a PM role, and I had to do some learnings and unlearnings. I joined a team that had a charter to build continuous delivery pipeline. At that time, we were kind of evaluating whether to buy or build in-house. We evaluated many products in the space and kind of zeroed in on in-release from InCycle software, simply because it had a strong integration with the Team Foundation server.
Okay. So what's been the most interesting change since coming to Microsoft from when you joined to what we're doing today?
Yeah, to kind of let you in on a secret, at around the same time, when I joined, we were trying to build out a release orchestration based on work items. Yes, you heard it right. The idea was you could use work items as a release stage orchestrator and leverage its rich workflow and traceability capabilities to start with. And the plan was to add the deployment capabilities later. Imagine from a Kanban board, you just move the card and the deployment kind of triggers off. We didn't pursue that experiment further. Instead, we kind of hedged our bets on the acquired IP. With that focus in the cloud, we were looking at pipeline as a service instead of just being a shrink wrap product and on-premises software. We had to kind of rewrite the code base with the multi-tenancy and other cloud QoS requirements. This was at the time when we were also releasing once in a year, and now we're kind of looking at shipping several times a day. And it was a great learning experience. We were actually our own first customers for the product that we are building. We had to ship it using what we were building. And pretty soon, we had other teams kind of started using the product. We had to ship it faster and ship it often. And imagine it's kind of inception at scale, if you will. Looking back, it's been a fun journey for me. When we started out to build the release management service, it wasn't really that obvious. Should we go about building it in TFS, or should it be a separate service in TFS, or should we continue investing on the acquired IP? This was at a time when Azure Portal's new UI was getting built. So the choices included whether to ship it as part of the Azure portal or TFS or standalone. But finally, we are there. Now we are Azure DevOps, right?
Right. Okay. And originally it was in WPF.
Yep.
And now it's web-based. How was that transition?
It was actually funny. Like, we had this WPF product and we had few customers who were using it. And when we actually started stretching it for the scale, what Microsoft was looking for, like, we were finding it kind of hard. Like, there were like some issues which kind of started showing up in the product, and we felt like, hey, this is not going to scale. And the UI also is more like retro, and we wanted to kind of modernize that. And also, since like pipeline as a service was one of the requirements, so we wanted to kind of rewrite the entire code base. And when we were taking those decisions, there were like a lot of moving parts as well. Should we kind of continue to build using Windows workflow, or like even some other workflow engines, or even base it on like kind of desired state configurations like PowerShell DSC or Chef or Puppets of the world used to do at that time? Or we kind of go on like our own infrastructure, and we wanted it to be cross-plat, Linux, Mac support, support for other platforms and programming languages. A lot of those decisions were made actually simpler because like we were listening to our customers, and based on the experience what we got from the WPF, we figured out like, hey, this is not going to scale. We actually have to go and kind of redo the whole thing. And we have seen this transformation at Microsoft too, like in other places in Microsoft. We have changed over a few years. Like the new Microsoft is kind of open and doing the right thing, what the customer wants. We did make a lot of mistakes, but we learned from them as well.
So we've kind of jumped in, but you know, some of our listeners might not be fully versed on what's capable from a deployment standpoint with Azure DevOps, and used to be the Release Hub and VSTS. And the listeners are longtime Visual Studio developers. So can you give me an overview of what's possible? What are the capabilities inside Azure DevOps for deploying their software for people who are maybe just starting to explore?
Yeah. Let me also kind of connect it back to our journey along with the question, the way you framed it, like as we kind of discovered like the features that we have to add to the product. So one of the features is like you as a developer coming to kind of deploy your software. Finally, you need to figure out like you need to identify the cloud platform of your choice to deploy to, like whether it is Azure or any other third-party clouds, or whether it is on-prem Azure stack and so on. So one of the challenges that we faced is like, hey, I need an ability in the product for the developer to connect the pipelines to the cloud, right? And I still remember the feature that we rolled out initially to enable the pipeline to connect to Azure, for example. The form had around like 8 to 10 fields, and user had to understand like multiple services. For example, Azure AD or a role-based access controls in Azure portal, and again the Azure DevOps parts. It wasn't really easy, so we kind of felt like we kind of got that feedback from the developers who are using, saying that, hey, this needs to be better. Hey, can you make it like really simple? Can I connect to Azure in a single click? It kind of took us like several iterations to get there, but now when we can, we are actually looking at now GitHub acquisitions. The like, things started getting more interesting. Like, can we get the GitHub identity working with Azure, GitHub identity working with like Azure DevOps? And as part of all these things, like once you are able to connect to your product, now you have your application that you want to kind of deploy from all the way from your dev test all the way to production. You need an ability to kind of visualize or like even group your resources, the target resources into some kind of identifiable set so that you can deploy to them repeatedly, and you can actually track all of your commits and codes which is getting deployed all the way from your resource control to the final target resources, right? Mm-hmm. At this point in time, we actually had like a great integrations with multiple deployment tools, whether it is like PowerShell or SSH or maybe any other scripting. And even like we had partnered with Chef and built the extensions for integrating with Chef. But we felt like this scenario could be simplified further. And we actually kind of went with a very prescriptive or kind of opinionated approach, saying that, hey, you can actually start using our build and release agents and create your deployment groups, so to speak, and then you can actually target all the deployments to it, right? And it could be all at once, or you could actually do a multi-machine deployment. You can do a rolling deployment to it. At the same time, you can take care that there are no, let's say, disruptions for your availability of application. For example, you can actually take a machine out from the load balancer, deploy your application, run your test, and once your tests are successful, you can actually connect the machine back to the load balancer, and then you can continue with the next set of the machines in the group, right? This kind of enables a safe deployment practice for your applications. And we had at that some time, we also had customers asking, saying that, hey, give me an ability to kind of I have this pool of machines which are there today, but the pool itself is elastic because based on the customer requirements, now I need to add more machines either dynamically or manually. How can you ensure that the new machine which gets added to the pool is at the same baseline as the release that has been deployed already? And we kind of went ahead and added features in the product so that you can set automatic deployment triggers so that whenever there is a new machine which is getting added to the pool, it kind of deploys the last successful release automatically with the new machine. And again, you as a developer, you'll find hey, I have this set of maybe hundreds of servers or a form of web servers, and let's say one of them is down. I would like to retry my deployment. But at this time, I want to target only those machines which are failed state. And so we allow you to do so. So these are some of the features which kind of focused around deployments. If you really look at deployments are quite complicated. It's kind of very involved. And you need an ability to kind of make it really, really simple. And one of the ways is kind of have that visibility into the actual resources where your application is deployed. And you should be able to kind of connect back all your code changes right from your repository to all the way to the physical resources. And you also need an ability to look at what's happening in case of issues. Can I go troubleshoot, get the logs of deployment, and so on. These are some of the features which are coming in hot and new. And there are other features. For example, one of the focus areas we have been looking at, how can you have safe deployment practices? For example, whether it is a compliant pipeline, whether it is integrating with, let's say, for example, Azure policies. In many ways, the responsibility of even the security is kind of moving up the value chain. We call it kind of shift left. We have added recently Azure policies integration. We kind of rolled out a release pipeline template for that. This will allow the users to create Azure policies, assign these policies to resources and as part of your DevOps pipeline, and actually validate it even before it reaches the production. So this is one way you can actually de-risk and do it over and over again in your a developer instance or a test instance, and before you actually deploy it to production. And here, even the policies are also maintained as code in your repository so that everything flows along in the same pipeline, and every changes that you have to make has to go through the pipeline, and there is no two ways about it.
Awesome.
And we often get some developers coming to us, hey, I'm interested to kind of get started with Azure DevOps, but help me kind of figure out there are too many things I need to know. And is there a way for me to get started quickly? And we went and built this Azure DevOps project in Azure Portal. It's a kind of advanced form of a launch board for the users, right? It's a quick way to get started with Azure DevOps. It will set you with a sample application, and it will even give you the code, which you can actually touch and feel. It is checked into your repository of your Azure DevOps account. And you also get a fully configured CI/CD pipeline that deploys this application to the choice of your service in Azure, whether it is a web apps for containers, or Kubernetes, or virtual machines. We have also kind of made this kind of really extensible so that you can also even bring in your own code from your own repository and actually set up the end-to-end pipeline that can be kind of extended and customized the way you want to work.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of information to take in. Let's take a quick pause for a word from our sponsor.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
And we're back talking with Roopesh. You were going over the capabilities of the pipeline, and it started out with whatever code and configuration you have, and certainly we can have just a directory of files with the results of a build process. What is the best package to start with? Is it a set of files? Is it a NuGet package? Is it a Docker container image? And how do you see the future of that? If people don't have an environment set up, it kind of starts at the build process. What guidance would you give them for packaging their application so that it really works well with the release capabilities?
So yeah, it's a great question, Jeffrey. Like, one of the challenges that I've always been with product software development has been like to manage the dependencies, like how you actually track your application dependencies, whether it is like some sort of a NuGet package or an NPM package, and it has all these dependencies which go all the way up. And finally, like, we are seeing like container kind of solves that to a great extent. So ability to kind of package that as like a Docker file, and you have this ability to even the deployment unit can be like a container image, right? Now I can actually push that along with my dependencies, and I can take it with fairly confidence, saying that, hey, if it works here in my dev instance, it always works in production, which is not the case earlier, when you will always miss some dependencies in your pipeline and you had to test it over and over again to ensure that you have captured all the dependencies. So I would say, I think the containers is one of the best ways to do that. And even within containers, like, you will end up with like layers that have dependencies on other images and so on. So there are like a lot of packaging solutions which are coming up built on containers. For example, Helm has this chart repository where you can actually package all the dependencies. And so is the new version which was recently launched called CNAP. So yeah, things are changing and it's very hot. And if you're a developer, you would love it.
So last I heard, Azure DevOps itself runs on Azure Service Fabric on Windows. And you mentioned you guys dog food your own products and use that yourself. Are any of the services or any of the groups deploying anything using Windows containers yet?
Not yet, actually. So we have some teams who have started evaluating that. So we are looking at Service Fabric and Service Fabric as containers. So there are like in pockets, like some services are getting built and getting tested out. But I would say like it's not there yet. We are not there fully yet.
Okay.
So this is something we have got on the list. It's kind of really high right now. But we definitely kind of want to build it at some point in time very soon.
Okay. And so if people are setting up their deployments right now with the current feature set, would you advise them to stick with NuGet application packages and keep an eye on the Windows container packaging? What guidance would you give them if they're doing it literally this month?
I think, yeah, it should work. Like eventually, like we'll have first class support to kind of package your dependencies even in the Windows container world as well. So I would say like you can continue to watch this space very closely, and you'll have an ability to kind of transition over smoothly there. Okay.
So one of the other things that I've caught wind of is experimentation services, and you're working on some features there, I understand.
That's right. Experimentation service, that's something we are working internally. We have always been like great fans of like feature flag based deployments. It's always been like, hey, we have this multiple ring based deployment which goes all the ways to production, and we ourselves being one of the initial rings. Like, for example, ring 0 is where our accounts are, and like then in the ring 1 we'll have our insiders and partner teams and so on. So the way usually goes is the deployment portion of it is completely separated from the actual feature rollout which happens. So the deployment bits are already laid out through the pipeline, but we have the control to say like, who gets to see this feature first. So we have always been doing that. With respect to like controlled exposure or feature flag, it's always been, the goal has been like ensure that there are no, like, let's say, crashes, there are no surprises, there is no drop-offs happening, and the engagement continues to improve. So it's always been kind of there for us. But there are, with increasing like advent of, like, let's say, AI and ML and other development practices which are there, there is a kind of strong focus on experimentation in the true sense of like A/B testing. You have like a version of it built, like configuration A or configuration B built it, and you want to kind of evaluate like which one is better. So we think like pipeline is the infrastructure where all these pieces comes together. So you should be able to kind of try out like multiple versions of your configurations, deploy them, and you will have an ability to kind of like, let's say I want like 30% of my traffic to be kind of hitting this configuration A, which is my control group, or then I have these two more variants which should get like, let's say, another 20% or 10% of the traffic, and you should be able to get the data telemetry coming in, like how your users are actually like perceiving the features, what's the like application, how the application is behaving, and so on. And that data should kind of help you to kind of make the decision whether to kind of pursue or pivot with that experience, and how you can continuously iterate and validate your hypothesis. So we have been kind of working closely on like enabling these capabilities in the pipeline itself. So to for the developers who are looking for controlling this experiment through the pipeline, managing the traffic assignments to them, that should be possible eventually.
Okay. And the deployment groups in the release hub, initially they were meant to work with IaaS or just go to directly with VMs, but there's so many other types of destinations that the software can be deployed to, including IoT. What are you guys thinking of and planning in those other spaces?
Yep, that's a great question, Jeffrey, once again. So yeah, we started out a deployment group with IaaS. So we had rolled out it, and we've seen great success with it. And obviously, like customers love to say like, hey, why it's only like IaaS? Why can't I do PaaS services? I should be able to do like, let's say, blue-green for my Kubernetes containers. I want to do Canary for my web apps, and so on. So we are working on this right now as we speak. So we have in lot many ways deployment group 2.0, or I would call it as like more like the real environments, which gives you an insight into like what's currently deployed to my production. First of all, it's a view of your production infrastructure, and are the production resources like health affecting my application or service? Can I trace the issues of code back to the commit and help me to debug? These are like some of the questions the developers are looking for. And from ops point of view, like we want to say like, hey, the production deployments are like usually like risky, like I want to take a backup, and sometimes I might need a downtime. Is there a way for me to kind of de-risk my deployments or upgrades? Can you help me do like a deployment strategies? Can I do like Canary, blue-green, or a rolling even for other resources, not just VMs? And finally, like it's all about like compliance and safe deployment practices. I want it to be auditable. I want it to be repeatable and predictable. So were these deployments approved? Were these authorized? If I have an issue, can you help me to debug? So these are like some of the questions we are trying to answer with our investments in this area. So we are definitely looking at enabling these scenarios, help users to track what is deployed on the production resources, help identify what are the features that are new that are getting deployed, and again like give complete traceability and security around that, and of course like give you like a way to kind of safely upgrade your resources without having to worry about like downtime and so on. So as part of this initiative, we are also looking at like how we can actually allow users to kind of define their production infrastructure. It might consist of whether it is like IaaS resources, whether it's Kubernetes containers, namespaces. It can be like your web apps or virtual machines. It can be your VM scale sets and so on. So that's our view of a real production infrastructure, so to speak.
Okay. So if I'm putting myself in the listener's shoes, I'm thinking, okay, just tell me how to do it. What can I copy? Are there any reference implementations, any samples? And so public projects have given us a view into kind of the build status and some information about projects in Azure DevOps. Are there some Release Hub examples that people can look at and literally see the full configuration and copy? What can we point them to?
We are getting there. As you're looking at, we have the YAML specifications out for CI. So with a lot of examples, like how you can do like a single stage pipeline, if you will, with capabilities like templatizing the workflows and so on. Slowly, you'll start seeing like a lot of CD concepts kind of coming in there. Like you'll have an ability to kind of define all these resources in YAML, and you'll be able to consume them as part of the pipeline. And that also includes like setting up your triggers, consuming resources, like let's say maybe from not just the build pipeline, it could be coming from a CI pipeline, maybe it could be coming from Jenkins, or it could be coming from your Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. So all of these examples are going to come up. Right now we are working through the designs. I think pretty soon you'll be able to see some more examples of it, which you'll be able to copy and configure your multi-stage CD pipelines with approvals and all the policies that CD brings in.
Okay. When do you think that the YAML configuration will be coming in?
Yeah, it's right now I can't commit the dates on this, but we are looking probably maybe like Q1 of 2019 or Q2 maybe. We are kind of shooting on that dates right now, so nothing that I can share.
Sure.
Concrete.
Well, everything changes, but hey, at least it's not by the end of the year, Q1 is better than Q4.
Okay.
So, philosophically, if you were to fast forward us, so much has changed in the last 10 years, but if you were to fast forward us, maybe only 5 years in the future or even 10, how do you think that we're going to be deploying software into the future?
You wouldn't even see it.
Okay.
It's like, like you just feel like, this is what the features should be. And you probably like just flip a button there and it should happen. The true one-click deployment, or the fact that it is even getting deployed, you should not even think about it like consciously saying that, hey, I need to take this and deploy to my production. It should just happen for you. So I think it's getting more and more abstracted from the developers. They just focus on the business logic, what they're like turning the ideas into reality, and rest everything is just noise. So you shouldn't be even thinking about the deployments, the infrastructure, the resources. All of this should be completely abstracted, and you're just focus on actual value that you need to deliver to your end users, and all of this rest, everything else is noise.
Yeah, won't that be a dream? Some of the questions that we get are around integrating the database, whether it's SQL Server or Cosmos DB or whether it's just a directory structure of files. When you have data that needs to be preserved from one release of the software to the next, but something about the structure of that data needs to change, whether you're adding or changing some columns in a database table, or whether you're having to rename or add folders in a folder structure where you save files, or the structure of blobs that you have in Azure Blob Storage. When you say, oh, wait a minute, we need to have the structure of a blob different. You have to preserve that data. It's not just, clear out what's there and copy new files. Are there capabilities in the Release Hub that is aimed at database migrations, or that will be next year?
We do have some few of the templates built out in the release pipeline today. So like there are different approaches for upgrading the data. There is like a completely offline upgrade or a cold upgrade, if you speak. So you actually take a backup of the data, you perform the upgrade, you test it out, and then you actually again put it back online. But it's not feasible that you do that for every kind of application out there. Maybe only certain type of applications can be done that way. With the world being completely online, you can't afford downtime. So there are like various approaches in the industry today. Like for example, you can do like partial online, partial offline upgrades, and then completely online upgrades. But of course, the application has to be built to be compatible with like multiple versions of your data structure, whether it is n and n-1, so your application tier, if you will, right? So you need to make sure that is compatible, and then you have a way to kind of, the way you do a whip swap with like, let's say, mid-tier, you should be able to do that even with a database as well. So I remember like when we were working on like some of these upgrade scenarios ourselves, like there are a couple of approaches. One is you can do it declaratively using DACPack, but that may not always scale when you're having like altering a column name. You can't afford to lose the data that is sitting in the column, and that's where like incremental migrations come into play. Like we ourselves do in the incremental migrations. We have this data scripts which actually capture the changes between every sprint and sprint which are happening on our databases, and that gets kind of run in a sequence, because that's completely controlled by like how it is kind of ordered and the way it is actually played out. So we have templates which help you to kind of configure online upgrades, offline upgrades, are completely like partially online or offline upgrades in the pipeline today. But of course, there is a lot of discipline that has to be built into your application development process as well. As I mentioned about like making sure your application tier is compatible with multiple versions of the database changes and so on. We also have integration in our marketplace with some of our partners, for example, Redgate with their extensions, which allow you to kind of do some of the safe upgrade scenarios for databases. So that's something we have, and we'll continue to invest in these areas to kind of make it better, so that you get a more predictable way of like database upgrades and kind of safe way to get there.
Well, that's a need that everyone has. Because every Visual Studio developer with a business application has a database. And you had mentioned the approach of SQL files that you execute in a sequence. What tool do you guys use internally to execute that directory of files?
Yeah, it's actually like our own homegrown tool. It's we have a way to kind of track all the files which gets changed, and those are automatically kind of tracked in an XML file which keeps track of all the changes which has happened when we actually build our package. That gets added to the manifest file, and finally during the time of deployment, the manifest file just reads through all the files and it kind of executes in sequence like, hey, these are the changes that are getting deployed. So
any way we could persuade you to open source that tool?
Maybe it's a good idea. We can definitely think about it.
You know, there's several other tools on the market that use that approach, which I think has become the industry standard approach of you have a directory and you have a set of SQL files, or you have a set of executable scripts of some type, because if you're using Cosmos or some other type, you just need a set of files where those files are immutable. Once you create a file, it is not going to be changed in the future, because the data store, the destination, stores the record of, has that file been executed on this target, and then the tool just kind of rips through, and if you need another change, just add a new file. Roundhouse is an open source tool for a SQL Server that does it, and AliasQL is another tool. I'm a committer on that project, and then ReadyRoll from Redgate. And renamed to SQL Change Automation, they also use that approach. I think that approach has largely become the industry standard, but now we just we need it formalized in the deployment tools. And you guys use it internally. Man, would that be an awesome feature inside Release Hub?
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
Because everybody has a database. I mean, maybe there's a few applications that don't, but the vast majority, have to store data in some way.
100%.
So before we go, it's been a great discussion. What should our listeners follow up on? What would you have them check out, resources, just to learn more about what we've been talking about?
I think the great resource to kind of follow us in is like our DevOps blogs, which are there, and then our Twitter handle for Azure DevOps. I think those are like two great resources. I personally I follow them every day. And we have few influencers in the industry, so I think that's great to follow them as well.
Well, thanks so much, Roopesh, for visiting with me. This is a lot of great information.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. It's been great talking to you. It's amazing. I love the podcast that you do, so I look forward to it.
Well, hey, it's fun doing it. I get to talk to a lot of people. And if you haven't, if you're just now joining us on this podcast, go back and check out the back episodes. And until next week, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.